I want to welcome Raul Reyes and Dianne Solis. We are here having a conversation about West Dallas. The idea is we want to have a conversation about the challenges and about the hopes and about the history. And first, we want to start with our guests, Raul. And so, Raul, if you could just introduce yourself, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dianne.
My name is Raul Reyes. I am first generation West Dallas site, father of three, and been in West Dallas as a family since 1969.
Your family, so three generations.
Right. My parents came from Mexico, arrived in Dallas in '64, moved around throughout South Dallas, then that area, and eventually decided to reside in West Dallas in '69, and from there they became homeowners in '79, and ever since then we've been moving to West Dallas. So we went to school here, the local high school, which is LG Kingston, and we've been here since then. Well, several years ago, around 2013, there was conversations that I was a part of that was being led by the Bud Center from SMU through Regina Nippert, and she was the executive director there. And one of the things that came out of it was the school zone, which is the Bud Center has been able to align all of the nonprofits. But one of the things that we saw, and that alignment was to be able to support the educational feeder pattern, which is the Kingston feeder pattern. My background is working with families. I have a degree in criminology and criminal justice. Been doing counseling for over 27 years and stuff like that. So in those conversations, we saw that, yeah, you can align the nonprofits, but just like the school district, they're limited because they don't go into people's homes, right? And a lot of what goes on in a child's life or a student's life starts at the home. So the thing was like, how can we get our parents, how can we get our community to be a part of this conversation and work in cohesion with the system, so the assets that we have already in the community, and not just from a recipient perspective, but how can we collaborate and I like to use this word, conspire together against the inequities of what we see, right? And that's how West Dallas One as a concept came around. And that was my idea. That was my suggestion. So from there, we started having dialogues. School Zone, started functioning as a coalition. Obviously, it was easier to organize that arm of the conversation because they are organized in the sense that they have, their own organizations. They have a mission, and it's just a matter of aligning conversations. But the neighborhoods or the parents, that's a different ballgame, especially in the community that historically hasn't been organized. I mean, they've organized around certain issues such as the lead smelter plant, some of the other issues such as the housing, but there was never a strategic long-term plan to that. It was all spontaneous. Let's address it. Once it gets resolved, that's it, right? And with my experience as a counselor, I was like, we have to address this as a family, right? I mean, that's the frame of reference that I come from because that's what I've dealt with. And the uniqueness of West Dallas is that, again, we're an island. A lot of people don't understand that when we say the island here is because we are barriered geographically. You know, you got 12 to the west, you got 30 on the south side, you got the river that comes around from the east, from the north, from the north onto. So the community is bounded. So everybody that lives in there, in our community, eventually the conversations, the relationships, the community starts to gel as one. And we only got one high school. Unlike if you go to Oak Cliff, there's several, and you know, Oak Cliff is massive compared to West Dallas. Here, the politics, the conversations, the culture, it all starts to blend at some point. You know, and we're talking about a community that has gone through demographical shifts, right? At one point was predominantly white, then black. Next thing you know, you got the Latinos in there, or actually Mexican. And then from there, you know, you start seeing gradiency, and all that starts to mesh, and they all have to go through the same experiences, right? Which is you know, I think we've all read The Accommodations, we've all read White Metropolis, and we understand that a lot of what we've gone through as an area, because of who we are, poor whites, blacks, browns, much of how the city has treated us. Now, think about it. We weren't incorporated till probably, you know, 60 years ago into the greater part of the city. We've all experienced that, and we've all had to deal with that. So we've all understood that we're in this together regardless. And I think what we see now in 2023, or since West Dallas One started, was that it was easier to have conversations, especially between the black and brown communities that are here, being that West Dallas is going through a demographical shift from Latino to be predominantly Latino, was that, hey, we can all agree on what's going on, right? We can all see the bridge. We can all see Trinity Grows, and we can all see our property value go up, and then eventually our taxes go up. And we can all agree that we're all, as much as we love our high school, that's what half of us, you know, when you look at the statistics, only half of us have a high school diploma. The next grade level up is 1.3, 1 point something, and that's 4 years of college. You go into postgraduate, you know, graduate school, the number drops to less than 1%. So we have an understanding of who we are, and we've made up for that by being resilient. You know, you just mentioned my neighborhood, Los Altos. When you come down Morris, that's my street that my mom's been at that same house since 79. Everybody there is first or second generation Latino, because I went to school with them. On Owen Chain, which sits that way, everybody there is a immigrant. They're either DACA or, you know, have some they're dealing with their immigration service. But they're all homeowners, as you pointed out. There's a high home ownership in Los Altos and La Bajada and the other neighborhoods as we head towards what used to be formerly the housing area. So the thing is that you got to understand that gradiency is there, but at the end of the day, we all have some common background, right? And that's what has made this community resilient, and that's why it has been easier to organize than in the past. Plus, you know, I guess, you know, the word that the young people use now, you know, everybody's woke or they're waking up. Well, you know, we kind of see that too, where we're seeing that, hey, man, you know, the problem ain't us. The problem is the system that's in place. And we're starting to have those kind of conversations from that perspective. So it allows us to understand that we have to work together and we have to participate in things, right? If it's the PTA, if it's the uh, neighborhood association meeting, and so on and so on. So that's what West Dallas 1 is about, and that's how that came about. You know, well, the smelter was back in the '90s. Matter of fact, I was in high school when those conversations were being held. I mean, Luisa Pulvera took the lead on that, which is now Judge Sepulveda, or formerly Judge Sepulveda, and they were able to get that resolved. It had been the lead plant. The plant had been there for over, like, since the 30s and 40s, all the way up to the 90s, and then I think it was the Clinton administration that was able to declare that a Superfund site, and that was the resolution to it. To this day, you got a lot of people that still are waiting on their lead checks, and I say it that way to really say that the impact of that plant is still being felt today. I mean, when you look at our alumni, because Princeton has a very strong alumni association. A lot of our classmates from the 70s, 80s, that right now should still be around when you look at it comparative to other areas. They're getting buried, and they're all dying of cancer or history of chronic diseases that they can't explain or whatever. And also part of that is obviously, certain inequities in the system of availability of healthcare and so on, right? I mean, there's always more to the story. But when we try to figure it out, like, hey man, why are we always losing these young in the sense that they're still in their late 50s, 60s, and they're gone, right? So that's the impact of that. So it's with that in context that we're dealing right now with a lot of cement and batch plants. Right now, where environmental justice is our focus for West Dallas 1, and not just West Dallas 1, but other neighborhood advocates, other groups that are in West Dallas that have come out from those conversations from that we have raised question to, and that they are now organizing. Such as Singleton United, being led over there by Janie Cisneros, who are actually residents that live around GAF plant, and they're actually having to suffer the brunt of it because what's going up is actually landing on top of them. So we're definitely dealing with those environmental issues. Some of the successes that we've had as West Dallas 1 is working with the city. The recent passing of phase 1 policies on batch plants, that was in cooperation with West Dallas 1. We're also dealing with the city. We're also in cooperation with additional air monitoring that we were able to secure through an EPA grant, $200,000, which is going to allow us to have 5 monitors be placed in West Dallas, and we're strategically going to put those around GAF to make sure that we're able to get the data that we need in order to make the case that the GAF plant and that facility is no longer appropriate land use, that it's no longer an asset to the community. To be quite frank, if people used to work there from our community, that was probably earlier when the technology and much of the work was not as technical. Because I mean, let's keep it 100. I think it's like 200 employees that they hired, right? But the nature of the work, the nature of technology, and this again, I haven't been in the plant, but I just have to assume, based on statistics and my understanding, that you probably have to have a degree, you probably have to have very extensive technical experience in order for you to work in those kind of facilities, because a lot of that is technology that reduces the need for hand labor, right? And when you look at when you frame from who it is that lives in West Dallas, you have to consider that. Saying that when we're dealing with the issue of development in the area, and you want to bring things in like a 400-foot tower, is another thing that we've been dealing with. And the proposal is that, hey, we're going to build a 400-foot tower because we want to bring jobs into the area, okay? And the developer is saying, hey, we're creating this for a Fortune 500 company. The first question that pops into my head is, how many of my neighbors are going to have a cubicle in that 400-foot tower? Now maybe say, well, that's a 400-foot tower. That's a commercial business. It doesn't comp, as they say, with the residential. But you got to understand how gentrification works, right? Usually there is a cornerstone to that. And if you bring a 400-foot tower and it starts bringing in people from the outside into the area, who do you think is filling in all these new houses that are being built in West Dallas? Because most neighbors, I wouldn't blame them. If they live in Plano or Frisco and have to drive to Dallas, or from Kaufman or whatever and have to drive to Dallas, with the price of gas right now, it's probably more economical to just move near the area. And if you're able to work in one of these Fortune 500 companies, your salary can probably allow you to make that decision much easier to move into the area, which is an area that's changing. It's attractive, then hey, why not? Well, what that does is that creates a need for housing, for new housing, and not just any housing, but nice housing, because those that are purchasing those homes can pay for it, right? That's how you have those $500,000 weekly homes over there in Trinity Greens, and those are being built every day. And I think we've already had our second $1 million house get built in the neighborhood. Well, that's raising the property value up. Now, for someone like me, I'll be 100 with you. That's good, because that means that my property value is going up, right? But again, I have 2 degrees. My siblings, they all have degrees. Some of them have masters. I got a brother who's a interim dean for Dallas College. I have a sister who's an administrator for UT Southwestern. Okay, I have a teacher in the family. I have another. We're all good because the foundation that was given by our parents. My 3 children, one's a 3L for Florida A&M Law. The second one just finished her master's in social work. She's doing great, and baby girl just came home from Florida A&M. So generational wise, we're going to be okay. Property value goes up. We can handle the taxes. Matter of fact, everything and when I say we can handle the taxes, is my parents, when they came in with hard work and purpose, not only owned their home, but they own several other properties in West Dallas. The kids have now taken ownership of that, because now we pay the taxes and do the maintenance of that. That means that the next generation is going to, when they get passed on, they now have generational wealth. But we should be the exception. My son says that all the time. Daddy, we shouldn't be the exception. Yeah, we should be the rule, right? If all this work that you're doing, that's what we should be setting everyone else up for, so they can have it. Now that's easier to say than to do, because as much as we would want to address the inequities of the systems, understand that there's individual choices that we have to make. How do we change that culture in the community, right? How do we start setting up that pathway for economic mobility? And that requires for us as a collective to understand and have values, so share the same values. So You know what? That they a lot of promises were high expectations. Let's put it that way. Came from that when those conversations were being made back in 20 2010 20. Well, it was actually even earlier than that. And no, to be quite honest, no. I visited the restaurants, and I don't see any of my neighbors, right? Uh, that's just being honest. I mean, I'm aware of a neighbor who jokingly does the circuit, goes from one restaurant to the next, uh, but that's as good as it's gotten to me. I mean, when I see like who's there, and it doesn't, it hasn't brought actually any jobs. And even on the development side, some of the things that West Dallas One has done when we're dealing with these zoning cases and these developers is to ask, how many people from West Dallas can you employ in your project? And, some of that, I have to be honest, because I have, accountability goes both ways. And it's just one of those things where when we have those conversations and we try to get that negotiated, there's been instances where the community just doesn't participate in that process, right? We say, hey, you know what, we're trying to get jobs for y'all, and it's not there, right? I mean, so I just can't put it straight all of it on the developers. A lot of it, again, it has to come. You have to have, as a community, and this is from the people perspective, we have to have an understanding, and for me that's the part that I feel where we're lacking, right? Because we can't keep up with the rate of development. The rate of development is moving at hundreds of dollars per second, but the investment in the community is not. And when I mean in the community, we're talking about the people. That we're still behind. We're lagging, right? So it's one of those things where, when it comes to employment, we one of the things that we've been looking at is what is out there. Building those relationships with Dallas College. Obviously, we have a campus. One of the things that we did with West Dallas One is that we just recently created the Health and Community Wellness Committee that's going to be led by Dr. Ashite and Dr. Solis, which both of them are residents of West Dallas, and start looking at how can we start actually building up our human capital, addressing it from a public health perspective, because that's Dr. Ashite, who's actually an internal medicine doctor, but also has a degree in master in public health, and Dr. Solis, who's Debbie Solis' daughter, who's one of the community leaders out here. She's a pediatrician, and start looking at how can we start developing our people, right? How can we start bringing in assets, resources, and identifying ways to inform our neighbors. Communication infrastructure. That's the other thing that's important. Ms. Dianne knows I work with Ms. Carrie Mitchell over at Dallas Free Press, and that was one of the reasons why I pushed to have her here in West Dallas, and that was to set up that communication, because neighbors, if neighbors know what's going on between each other or going on as a neighborhood, then we're able to have intelligence or intel on how to make decisions, right? And communication infrastructure, not just hard infrastructure such as internet and so on, but soft infrastructure. How do we communicate with each other without actually being in each other's face? Being that now we have access through social media, and other ways to communicate uh, uh, in mass. So and I say that because storytelling is important. One of the things that I appreciate growing up was being able to sit on someone's porch, you know, and hear the stories. That doesn't happen anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens to the next generation is that they don't have an identity. They don't have those oral folklores that get passed down orally that are not written down on books, right? So that's important, and that's what used to be the strength of West Dallas back in the day, and that's how you end up with high home ownership, because things are conversed and taken and discussed, and you start getting ideas, because not everyone in West Dallas, has the knowledge of that. Home ownership in 2023, that's crazy. You got to go through a bank, you got to do this, you got to get your credit. Back in the day, it was, yes, it was different, but there was conversations that say, hey, this is how you do it. Mira aquí, habla con este, papá, papá, papá. So that's how you built up the community, the village, right? So now is how do we modernize and how do we upgrade that? That's why media is important. That's why, again, going back to the point of I praise Miss Solis, all the time, of her being a storyteller of our stories, because that allows us to be able to communicate on what's going on one end of the neighborhood and the other, but being able to share, our wins, our challenges, and it starts creating action plans, because I'm not the only one leading. There's a lot of leaders. You got Henry Martinez, David Solis, Dr. Pat Stevens, Pastor Butler, Maria Garcia, over at La Bajada, Mr. Losada's daughter. So Paul Hutchison over at Gilbert Emery. So we're all communicating, and we're all utilizing what's going on through our media feed, what's going on in the newspaper. That's why, Dianne will tell you, as soon as a story comes out from you guys, Dallas Morning News, it gets posted, on our Facebook page. We're just now getting the website developed, so now we're going to be able to be more fancy with it. But the point is that how do we inform our neighbor and have those stories be told about who we are? Because it's the better we know who we are, the better we can do on how is it that we want to move and forward towards a future. We appreciate the fact that color is being added to those sites, right? Being that historically they were, like you said, there were fabrication sites and there were industrial sites, and that's always been a reminder of our history, right? So the fact that there now are becoming canvases of art and expression, that's awesome. Plus, they tell stories. That, again, going back to how do we communicate with our neighbors? That is awesome, right? A lot of that is I feel once we were what's her name, Miss Ilkner over at Artillery, because she also works in that whole area. She does the theatrical. I know right now that she has a piece that's happening at an interactive story that she's telling over at Fair Park. But it all started with the story that she was telling over on Main Street, right? With the Family Dollar stories. Art is important. Art is important because for our kids, at least for me, I got 3 children. I got the athlete. He played ball at SMU. The oldest, and then I got a reader that she's an essay writer, and then the youngest, my baby girl, she's an artist, right? And all 3 of them have three different characteristics, but they all express what they're thinking through what they do. And for me, as a parent, as a single parent, that was important to encourage that, right? Because at the end of the day, that was one of the things that gave me relief that they were had a way to express, the challenges that we were going through as a family. Saying that, that is the same purpose of the arts, right? That's going on there. That it's not, a community that is at some point was looked at as being vagrant, as being foul, and the gangs and so, all that and expression of art, because we've had artists ever since then, right? But now that that's being supported, now that that's being encouraged, and now that obviously there's people, new neighbors coming into the area and showcasing their skills and their talents and willing to share that. And now it's become a annual event, right? They come out, people, they have the people come out and they look at that and it's celebrated. Hey man, and it's in West Dallas. So we get, like I always say, we get credit on the lights, right? so that's something that's a buildup. My only fear, and I'll be honest with you, and this is not the call no one, is that we all know that that's all owned by by a certain developer that owns all that, right? All that whole tract of land.